September is Insider Threat Awareness Month, so thank you for coming out to my presentation. For those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Sean Oden, and I'm a geek who likes to show shiny objects. I used to fly airplanes until I accidentally became a programmer, and now I've been a DBA for the U.S. Army for the last 6 years or so. Security is kind of a big deal in the military, so I've done quite a bit of security training and internal certification, including earning a CompTIA Security Plus certification shortly after my first military gig. Cybersecurity is another one of the shiny objects I've found myself chasing, and a subject that has become more critical as years have passed, but it still doesn't get the attention that it should. I want to offer a quick disclaimer here. I don't consider myself a cybersecurity expert, but nearly all of my career has been spent in sensitive environments like aviation, insurance, background screening, medical, and military. I've seen enough of it to know that cybersecurity is a massive topic, and I'll leave that career path for others to be the experts on for at least for now. But it is still a topic that fascinates me, and hopefully I can inspire some of that curiosity in you. So let's start with a riddle. One day you're sitting in your office when in walks a programmer, a network admin, and a boss. How many potential insider threats are in the room? Now, before we can answer that, let's define what we're looking at. First, what is an insider threat? It's someone or something with authorized access into a system who can use that access to harm it, either intentionally or unintentionally. This usually includes employees, both current and former contractors, vendors, visitors, pretty much any entity with access. This can even include other systems and devices that can get onto the network, like your smart lights or your Wi-Fi Roomba, pretty much any IoT device. One other quick definition here. A threat actor. A threat actor is essentially the bad guy who's behind the insider threat. It's whoever is ultimately responsible for causing harm to the company. But why does this matter? Now, businesses generate a ton of data, whether it's proprietary company info, payroll data, customer details, or whatever. If the business were to lose control of that data, it would hurt. For some businesses, it could mean loss of their product, damage to their brand, harm to their reputation, a loss of trust, or in some cases, there may be legal issues or penalties, any of which can kill a business. It's important to remember that as an employee, we have a duty to protect the interests of our company and our customers. For several years, Verizon has released the Data Breach Investigation Report. It's a fairly deep look at thousands of breaches that happened throughout the previous year, and it provides a good summary of the trends throughout the year. COVID in 2020 forced many businesses to make some significant changes, and work from home increased quite a bit. This raised the insider threat risks, but fortunately, Verizon didn't find an increase in remote abuse. Hopefully that trend has continued through 2021. They did not find that exploiting insider credentials, or they did find that exploiting insider credentials was still the largest attack vector, and phishing is still huge. They also reiterated that the size of the company didn't matter. Everyone is a target. There's a ton of other info in the report, so it would be a good thing to look at. I've added a link to the report at the bottom of this at the end of this presentation. Now, a few decades ago, damage an insider could cause was usually limited by the amount of paper they could carry. Now, when punch cards were the primary method of data storage, an insider could get maybe a few kilobytes of data. Each card held 80 bytes, and it took over 62,000 punch cards just to make a 5 megabytes worth of data. An insider could also take pictures of documents or just steal them, but that has its own risks too. Plus, it requires direct access to those documents. By the 60s, 70s, and 80s, digital storage had become a thing. The insider could copy documents to floppy disks, and though it was a bit more discreet, it still wasn't a lot of data. In the 90s, zip drives made stealing data much easier. They could hold 100 to 250 megabytes, but they still required specialized hardware. There was prone to malfunction. and anyone familiar with the infamous click of death can tell you. In the late 90s, writable CDs became a feasible alternative. They could hold about 650 megabytes of data, they were light, and they were easy to disguise as something else. But they also required specialized hardware. Early CD writers and discs were much less reliable and fairly slow, and I can remember many long waits for a burn to complete, only to end up with a coaster. Modern drives have improved tremendously and can write much larger capacities at a much faster speed. Also, modern USB technology has allowed for extremely large drives that are both cheap and easy to conceal. Plus, the USB interface is now pretty universal. And with cloud storage and high speed internet being nearly everywhere, it wouldn't be difficult for an insider to steal pretty much all of a company's data. The image of the threat needs to change. It's not enough to just worry about the hacker, and we also need to worry about the insider threat too. There are two basic categories of insider threats. There's the malicious insider who know they're being bad, and there's the unintentional insider who doesn't. There's also the compromised insider, which is kind of a hybrid of the two. Now, malicious insider is an insider threat who intentionally uses their authorized access to cause harm to their organization. These types of insiders can be difficult to detect because these are legitimate users. When an insider becomes malicious, it's rarely an impulsive act. They usually spend a lot of time building up to their decision to become a malicious insider, then plan how they're going to pull it off, and usually the malicious action is instigated by some event, like getting reprimanded or fired. Typical types of actions a malicious insider takes are leaking, which is the unauthorized transfer of data from an insider to an external actor; sabotage, which is deliberate damage, destruction, or disruption of company assets; theft of money, equipment, or some other company assets. There's data exfiltration, which is the unauthorized removal of a company's data assets, like code or customer details. It may be leaked also. There's fraud, which is altering or abusing company data for some sort of personal gain. This also includes insider trading. There's espionage, which is the theft of sensitive data or intellectual property to be given to a competitor to give them a competitive edge. It's a term that's more common in government and military settings, but it still applies to the corporate world. And then violence. This can include workplace bullying, harassment, or worse. Malicious insiders are usually motivated by greed, disgruntlement, or their own sense of ethics. Most insider threats have been pretty obvious in hindsight. They usually have a reason for what they do and plot before they act, often giving themselves away if anyone is paying attention. Money was the single largest motivator in the earlier Verizon report. It's been a top motivator for several years. Family or relationship problems is another top motivator and is often linked to financial problems as well. Disgruntlement. Disgruntled employees are usually looking to punish the company or whomever it is that's causing their anger. It's also indicative of future violence or espionage. And most insiders have demonstrated problems with drugs and alcohol or other substance abuse issues. Insiders also tend to be loners, or they tend to be antisocial. And they also often demonstrate a temper or have a history of making provocative statements. This one is another indicator of potential violence. When a malicious insider is approaching or has reached their tipping point, they often continue to escalate their concerning behavior. They try things that they aren't supposed to. They try to access things they aren't supposed to. Or they ask about things that they shouldn't, potentially to find the juicy bits. They may start poking around in areas they don't have access to. They may have repeated security incidents, like mishandling sensitive material or bypassing login checks. They may copy data and take it home without permission. They may bring unauthorized electronics into sensitive areas, even after being told not to. These can be things like USB sticks, cameras, recording devices, or even cell phones, which are pretty much all of the above things. Yeah, they may suddenly start working late or coming in late on the week or coming in during the weekends or any other time when nobody else is around to see what they're doing. And when an employee is making secretive travel to talk with other competitors or to talk with competitors, this is indicative of someone who might be about to become an active malicious insider, especially if they don't report this travel or the meetings. Or it could just mean that they are being felt out by the competitor. Regardless, watch out. When an angry employee begins making threats or is openly hostile, this isn't a good sign. Your new Bugatti may look cool, but I hope you have a good reason for where you came up with the money to buy it. Sudden wealth or spending a lot of money that you shouldn't have is a very strong indicator of insider threat behavior. And it's also often a reason that insiders finally get caught. In short, yes, you probably should be concerned. It's important to remember that these actions don't automatically make someone an insider threat. They're just common behaviors that nearly all prior insiders have exhibited. I'd be willing to bet that some of you out there could probably be able to attribute some of those behaviors to yourselves, especially for people who work in administrative IT positions. So don't rush to judgment, but also don't be afraid to bring your concerns to your security team. Now let's take a look at some actual malicious insiders. Aldrich Ames was a former CIA counterintelligence officer who began spying for the Soviet Union in 1985. He was once considered the most prolific spy. He abused his authorized access to high level info to find Russians spying for the United States. His supervisor thought that he was intelligent, but a bit of a loner. During his career was peppered with good reviews, followed by bad reviews, followed by good reviews, etc., etc. He also had excessive. He had a problem with excessive drinking that was often noted at company events and by his superiors. He also had several security incidents, including leaving a classified briefcase on a subway and leaving his alias documents at a ballpark once. Uh, Between his wife and a girlfriend, he had a lot of money problems, and that was his excuse for spying. His initial plan was to spy just one time, but the money was too good. He made about two to 5 million for his spying, which ultimately his coworkers noticed, which led to his arrest in 1994. His primary method of stealing data was pretty much by stealing paper documents and wrapping them up to carry out. The next guy, Robert Hansen, spied roughly at the same time as Aldrich Ames, but with the FBI instead of the CIA. Ultimately, he took that most prolific title from Ames, and he's also one of the most successful insider threats in history. He's also considered to be the first cyber spy because of his computer database skills. He had delusions of being James Bond, and his supervisors felt that he was a poor field agent with bad people skills. They ultimately moved him to a desk, and it killed his James Bond fantasies. So that left him pretty angry and disgruntled. He had a large family, and he always needed more money, so he began spying. His wife once stumbled across his spying, but he played it off, and she ignored it. He continued his career with a huge chip on his shoulder and ultimately became extremely paranoid. After dodging discovery for 20 years, he was finally arrested in 2001, just months before his retirement from the FBI. On the tech side, he was well known for being highly skilled with computers, and he abused that skill to monitor and derail investigations of his spying. Early on, he mostly stole paper documents, but eventually the technology allowed him to use a Palm Pilot to copy and exfiltrate data. He also used it for encrypted communications with his Soviet handlers. If you're interested in more about him, Eric O'Neill, the agent who ultimately caught him, wrote a great book called Gray Day. And the next guy, there's been a controversy about his arrest, especially among other IT folks, who can often relate to his story. Now, Terry Childs was the only admin and the creator of a massive, very complicated network for the city of San Francisco. He didn't want other people messing with his network, and he changed the credentials to something that only he knew. Uh, when his bosses became concerned about this, they asked him for those passwords, and he refused to give them. He was arrested, and ultimately it took 10 days before he was able to before he gave the passwords to anybody. Now, I should note that there was no outage of the systems, but if there had been, nobody else would have been able to fix it except for him. His actions may not have been intentionally malicious, but rather extremely paranoid and misguided. He could have caused significant damages to the city's networks. What was malicious was that he refused to turn over the passwords to his bosses when he was asked. He was also allowed to install unauthorized software and devices that gave him total remote control over the systems. In 2010, Chelsea Manning was an Army intelligence analyst in Iraq. She stole nearly 750,000 documents, plus images and videos, and then leaked those to WikiLeaks, who published them on the internet. She had several risk indicators growing up, or before her leaking. First, she grew up in a very troubled home. Both parents were alcoholics, and they ultimately divorced. When she joined the Army, there were indicators of mental stress, but these were ignored because the Army desperately needed intelligence analysts. She was small and often bullied by her fellow soldiers and superiors. She was once reprimanded for posting details of a classified facility on social media. And then before her leaking, she told a counselor that she was very opposed to the Iraq War. On the tech side, Manning was extremely good with computers. She had also had access to a tremendous amount of improperly secured and highly classified information. And the amount of data that Manning was able to take should be noted. 30 to 40 years earlier, Aldrich Ames was limited to pretty much how much paper he could smuggle out in plastic bags. Robert Hansen was limited by the drive capacity of a Palm Pilot. Manning copied the data onto 17 CDRWs, stealing almost 750,000 pages, plus videos and pictures. That's almost 100 times more than Hansen was able to take. Imagine what could be done with a modern portable USB drive, or even a thumb drive. And this next guy is probably one of the most polarizing figures in IT. In 2013, Edward Snowden was working as an intelligence consultant for the CIA and the NSA when he stole and leaked some highly classified documents detailing the surveillance methods of the United States government. There was very little indication that Snowden was a threat, but he still became one. He is extremely intelligent and became disillusioned about some of the work that he saw. He tried alerting his supervisors, but they pretty much ignored him. It should have been noted that he left a very high-paying job to come back into government service. And he admits that he did this for the specific purpose of getting access to the data that he could steal. Now, our last person is almost a textbook example of an insider threat. In 1999, Michael Bolton was a senior programmer for Initech Software. After learning of a layoff, he conspired to steal money from the company by crafting a virus that would steal an undetectable balance from each of Initech's accounting transactions. There were several threat indicators. The work environment was very hostile, and general morale was very low. Michael often faced harassment over his name, which angered him. He was also extremely frustrated with most facets of Initech's business, especially faulty equipment in his work area. On multiple occasions, he verbally expressed those frustrations. When Initech decided to downsize its employees, Michael was slated to be laid off, which was the ultimate trigger for his malicious actions. It should be noted that Initech did practice separation of duties, which is what required Michael to work with two other employees. However, because they didn't employ any monitoring, the virus was allowed to enter their network and spread. In those previous examples, there were numerous warning signs of potential malicious behavior, and it's important to not ignore those signs. But an insider threat can also be an accident. An unintentional insider is pretty much the same as a malicious insider, except for they don't have the intent to damage anything. They also may not even be aware that they're a threat. Since it's difficult to predict when an accident is going to occur, the two best ways to prevent or mitigate damage from an unintentional insider is through good insider threat awareness training and effective monitoring. Some of the common ways people become unintentional insiders are falling victim to phishing. This is extremely common, and despite the warnings, people still fall for phishing attacks. Unintentionally introducing malware. Don't click on email links. Don't install unauthorized software. That new Bitcoin wallet may not be what you think it is. Also, don't plug in USB sticks. Leaving devices like your computer or phone unlocked. This can allow someone else to use your device to impersonate you or do things under your login. Using weak or shared passwords. You should use strong passwords, or better yet, use a password locker like 1Password or LastPass, and let that create a totally unrememberable password for you. Spillage. Is the accidental leaking of company data. Sorry. And on oversharing on social media. If I go to your Facebook page, am I going to be able to find out your mother's maiden name, the high school that you went to, your first pet name, your first pet's name, and where you met your spouse? Don't overshare. Also, don't forget to properly set your permissions. And deploying developer-centric code to production. Raise your hand if you've never accidentally pushed debugging code to production. Code reviews can help prevent this, but also don't forget about your site error messages. Don't let them leak unintentional data. Unintentional access privileges. It's easy to give people permissions to do things that they don't normally do when they need to do them. It's also even easier to forget to remove those permissions when they're done. And if you're using Active Directory groups with nested groups, make sure you know who's in those groups. You don't want to unintentionally give permissions to somebody that you didn't mean to. Also, don't use admin accounts in your app server or in SQL Server. Use an explicitly created service account. How many of us just use SA or something like that to connect to their database? And properly securing your cloud resources. Did you forget to lock your MongoDB deployment? And then allowing your family to use your company laptop. With the rise of work from home, this is very easy to do, but don't let your family accidentally make you into an unintentional insider. And this is another example of the wrong person letting their kid play with their cell phone. Or is it an encoded message indicating that some missiles are about to fly? Most people don't want to hurt their company, but unintentional insider threats make up the majority of incidents. Some studies have shown that over 80% of data breaches are caused by human error. Better training and awareness can help mitigate this risk, and insufficient cybersecurity awareness or training is a major issue. The last category of insider threat is essentially a high-risk subset of unintentional malicious insider. A compromised insider threat is an unintentional insider who is being made into a malicious insider by another entity. A common example would be an employee who clicked on a link in an email, resulting in a virus. But a more complex example could be an employee who was tricked into installing malware created by an outside threat actor. Or from the developer point of view, it could be uh, using compromised dependencies in your code. Now, how many of you remember Stuxnet from 2010? It's a computer worm that was designed to target and destroy a very specific piece of equipment used by Iran's uranium enrichment program. The systems were air gapped or designed to be used without external access to the internet, so there was no way for the threat actor to hack into the systems. They copied the worm onto a USB stick, and depending on the story, they either used a malicious insider to carry the USB stick inside and plug it in, or they dropped the USB stick in the parking lot in hopes that some unsuspecting insider would pick it up and plug it in inside the building. However they did it, it worked a little bit too well. Another insider took an infected USB device home, and when they plugged it into their computer, they became a compromised insider on the entire internet. And that's how Stuxnet began its trip around the world. One method that an external threat actor uses is elicitation. With elicitation, the threat actor is trying to get information from an insider without the insider really realizing the intent. They usually have a very specific goal, and they are very good at getting the information that they want. They aren't likely to come out and directly ask you what they want to know because that might put you on the defensive. Instead, they rely on human nature to get what they want, and it usually works. People want to be helpful. They also want to appear well informed, and they want to be liked. People don't want to seem rude, and people sometimes like to show off or gossip. People also underestimate the value of the data that they have, and then people also prefer to be the best, to see the best in others, and they often misinterpret the elicitor's intention. So if someone asks you for more details about what it is that you do at work, their intentions may not be as innocent as they may seem. They may already know exactly what you do, which is why they talk to you in the first place. The elicitor may not necessarily be a bad guy, but their goals likely don't align with yours. The elicitor is trying to get information from you, so be careful what you share. Now, company executives usually have a very high level of access to their systems. And while you do need to keep an eye on them, there's another group of employees who likely have a much higher access. Programmers and system administrators often have godlike access levels, so we have the potential to cause the most damage. And though many of us probably don't want to admit it, we're human. We're just as susceptible to either becoming an unintentional or malicious insider threat as anyone else is. We're also in the best position to detect and mitigate an insider threat problem before it becomes more serious. And because we're supposed to be experts, we have the ability to influence insider threat awareness within the rest of our company. Now, you've seen some of the things that insiders do, so don't become that insider. There are a few things that you can do to be that you can be conscious of that'll help you to avoid becoming an unintentional insider. First, avoid talking about work outside of work, especially if you're working on a sensitive project. You just never know who's listening. Second, be aware of what you can and can't discuss. You're going to talk about work anyway, so just make sure that you know which topics are taboo. Be mindful of curious strangers. So they may be innocent, but you don't really know. If they ask about something you shouldn't talk about, deflect the question. And if they keep asking, your best bet is just to excuse yourself from the conversation. Maintain situational awareness, especially when you're out of the office or at a social event. And even more so if that event involves drinking. You don't want to be the compromised insider. Or you don't want to become compromised by a threat actor. Don't wear badges or other work ID outside of the office. A common tactic of people trying to gain physical access to an area that they aren't supposed to be in is to create fake identification. That's much more difficult for them if they don't know what the ID is supposed to look like, which is closely related to the next point. Don't take pictures of yourself wearing your ID or uniform. Practice good password policy both at work and at home. Use some sort of password locker like 1Password or LastPass. There's a ton of good information on what makes a good password, and password 123 just doesn't cut it. And be extremely mindful of social media. Again, don't overshare. And also don't allow your family members to use your work equipment. Within the COVID-induced work from home, increase in work from home, this has become especially important. You don't want your toddler making a major mistake on your part. Don't plug stuff in. Anything USB is generally asking for trouble, so watch out for it. Make sure to lock your computers or phones when they aren't in your possession. This seems to be common in a lot of offices, but you don't want to come into work the next day to find out that you fired off a nasty email to the CEO and CC the entire company. Lock up or secure sensitive materials. If you're working on a report with people's SSNs on it, don't just leave it on your desk when you're away. Lock it in a drawer or something, and don't forget to destroy it when you're done. Use separate user and admin credentials for appropriate tasks. Admin credentials are going to have much higher access than user credential would, so don't mix them. Then have a consistent deploy process, including code review. This will help prevent a developer from either accidentally deploying malicious code, and it will make it harder for a malicious actor to sneak in bad code. Security review. Make sure you security review your dependencies fairly regularly. And don't talk to the media unless that's your job. The media isn't necessarily a threat, but they can still cause a lot of damage, especially if they don't fully understand what you're saying or if you don't fully understand what they're asking. Refer them to your PR department, and if you don't have one, no comment is a safe bet. Be aware of the risks to your business. Your church website may not have as critical of information as a nuclear plant does, but it still needs to be protected. Also, make sure you're familiar with any rules or regulations that may apply to you. And be familiar with your process for handling a security event. You don't want to have to look up those processes when you're already trying to deal with a security event or with a security matter. Early identification and intervention are critical to stopping an insider threat. Address the problem before it's too late. Employees are in the best position to see insider threat behaviors early. Empower them to report those threats or any other issues that can affect cybersecurity. One of the most important things that can be done to minimize a potential threat is to offer help to them when they need it. We're all humans with human problems. Employee assistance programs can go a long way towards keeping someone on the right side of the threat equation. And then happy employees are much less likely to become insider threats, and informed employees are less likely to become unintentional threats. Foster a healthy working environment to minimize disgruntlement. Monitor for problematic actions and enforce policies that keep the company's assets secure. Don't overprivilege user or other accounts. Limit access of unnecessary devices. Limit exposure by not allowing connections that aren't needed. And limit privileged users to only the permissions they need. And finally, when an employee leaves, remove their access. Monitor the system that they had access to. Make sure to disable any accounts they used, and make sure you watch out for any malicious changes, especially if they were admin level users, and even more especially if they left under negative circumstances. Monitoring won't stop the threat, but it can mitigate it. Now, back to our riddle. How many potential insider threats are in the room? Well, there's the programmer, there's the network administrator, there's the boss, and then there's you. Anyone can be the insider threat. Trust your people, but also protect your systems. Verify that their jobs are being done properly. If you'd like to know more about insider threat awareness or cybersecurity, I've added some links here. Thank you again for coming out today, and thank you to Orders for having me out again.